The rain poured down over the lonely stretch of countryside, turning the dirt path into a ribbon of mud and sorrow. She walked slowly, clutching her baby close to her chest, every step heavy with exhaustion. Her long dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame, and her fiery red hair was plastered to her pale face. She had been walking for hours, wandering without direction, carrying nothing but the child in her arms and the pain in her heart. The baby whimpered softly, its tiny cries lost in the rhythm of raindrops striking the earth, and each sound made her grip tighter, as if letting go would mean the world itself would collapse. She had no home, no one waiting for her, and no shelter in sight. Despair pressed against her like the storm itself, until her legs buckled, and she nearly fell to her knees in the mud. She tried to soothe her child, whispering through trembling lips, but her own voice cracked from hunger and fatigue. She had not eaten since morning, and the baby's small body felt so fragile against her, that she feared any moment it would slip away into the same cruel void life had thrust upon her. Tears mixed with the rain on her face, and she felt utterly invisible, like the world had chosen to pass her by. In that moment, she truly believed she would collapse and never rise again. Then, through the curtain of rain, she heard the steady sound of hooves approaching. Her head lifted slowly, afraid it might be a dream. But the figure of a rider came into view. A tall cowboy sat astride a chestnut horse, his hat shielding his eyes from the rain, his coat darkened and dripping from the storm. His presence was commanding yet calm, as though the storm itself had no power over him. He guided his horse closer until he stopped a few feet away, watching the woman clutching the baby with desperation. His eyes softened when he saw the child, and in one swift movement, he dismounted and walked toward her. "You'll catch your death out here." His voice was deep, steady, with a warmth that cut through the cold rain. She looked at him, frightened and unsure, stepping back slightly as if even kindness might hurt her. But the baby let out another cry, and she could no longer pretend she had the strength to go on. Her knees trembled again, and this time, she nearly fell. The cowboy reached forward quickly, steadying her by the arm. He felt how cold and weak she was, and without hesitation, he reached down to lift the child gently from her arms, holding it with surprising tenderness. She froze, terrified, until she saw how carefully he cradled the baby, shielding it from the rain with his broad chest. "I've got you both," he said softly, glancing at her with a firm, reassuring nod. "Come on, let's get you out of this storm." He led her toward his horse, keeping one strong arm around her shoulders while still balancing the baby safely. The horse shifted and snorted, but the cowboy whispered something low, and the animal stilled as if it understood the urgency of the moment. He boosted the woman up onto the saddle, steadying her weakened frame, then carefully placed the baby back into her arms before climbing up behind her. His arms came around them both as he took the reins, his presence like a wall of strength against the chaos of the storm. She clutched the baby tightly, trembling not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming strangeness of being saved. When she had expected nothing but darkness, her eyes welled with tears again, though this time they were not only from pain. The cowboy urged his horse forward, and the steady rhythm of hooves, splashing against the muddy road, gave her a small sense of security she had not felt in years. The rain still fell, soaking them, but for the first time, she felt she was no longer drowning alone. As they rode, she dared to glance up at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She didn't even know his name, nor why fate had led him to find her in her most broken moment. He met her gaze briefly, offering a quiet smile, then looked ahead toward the horizon where faint lights flickered in the distance. "We'll reach shelter soon," he promised, his voice calm, steady, unshaken by the storm. She lowered her head again, hugging her baby close, whispering softly as the child drifted into an exhausted sleep. The cowboy tightened his hold just slightly, a silent vow that he wouldn't let either of them fall. In her heart, a tiny spark of hope began to flicker, fragile but alive. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something new. The storm raged around them, but within the circle of the cowboy's arms, she felt the faintest promise of safety, as though destiny had just shifted its course. And so they rode on, through the endless rain, A broken woman and her baby cradled in the strength of a stranger who had chosen, without hesitation, to lift them from the mud and carry them toward the unknown. The storm had not lessened, but under the cowboy's careful guidance, the horse carried them steadily toward the flickering glow in the distance. The woman held her baby close, rocking gently, her body still, trembling from cold yet steadied by the warmth of the man seated behind her. His arms, strong and certain, framed her as though nothing in the world could touch her now. She had not spoken a single word, not even her name, but the silence between them did not feel empty. It was heavy with unspoken questions, quiet gratitude, and the faint breath of hope. The closer they came to the light, the clearer it became. A small cabin, standing solitary against the wilderness, smoke rising faintly from its chimney despite the storm. The sight almost broke her. After days of wandering, here was shelter that felt more like a miracle than mere coincidence. The cowboy dismounted first, water streaming from the brim of his hat, then reached up to lift her gently down from the horse. She swayed slightly, but he steadied her with one hand while his other shielded the baby. Without a word, he guided her toward the cabin, opening the door to let her step inside. Warmth washed over her immediately, the crackling fire in the stone hearth chasing away the chill that had clung to her bones. She gasped softly at the sudden comfort, and for a moment, her legs nearly gave out. But he was there again, lowering her carefully into a wooden chair near the fire. "Stay here. You and the little one need heat more than anything," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of command but wrapped in kindness. She could only nod, clutching her baby close as steam rose from her soaked dress. The cowboy disappeared into another room, then returned with a thick wool blanket, draping it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight, her lips trembling, not just from the cold but from the overwhelming relief of being safe. Her baby stirred, opening tiny eyes, and for the first time that night, the child's cry was not of fear but of hunger. The cowboy knelt by the fire, pulling out a tin kettle and some supplies. Soon the smell of warm milk drifted through the room. He poured it carefully into a small wooden cup, then brought it to her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he guided it toward the baby's lips. She hesitated, unsure if she should accept help from a stranger, but the baby's weak cry tore at her heart. With shaking hands, she let him help her feed the child. The baby drank eagerly, and her own tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. She whispered a broken thank you, her voice almost too soft to hear. The cowboy didn't press her for words. Instead, he sat back on his heels, watching quietly, his eyes filled not with pity, but with a steady patience that felt like an anchor in a storm. When the baby was satisfied and finally drifted into peaceful sleep, she laid the child gently onto the blanket the cowboy spread by the fire. Only then did she meet his gaze fully for the first time. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why help us?" He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged lightly, though there was gravity in his words. "Because no one deserves to face the rain alone. Not you, not that little one. I couldn't just ride past." His honesty struck her harder than any cruelty she had endured, and for a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her heart, so used to betrayal and abandonment, ached under the weight of his simple compassion. As the night went on, she slowly shared fragments of her story. How she had lost her home, how the man she once trusted had left her with nothing but a baby to protect, how every door she had knocked on had been closed to her. She expected judgment, maybe even scorn, but the cowboy only listened, nodding silently, his jaw tightening as if angered by the injustices she had suffered. When she finally fell silent, the cabin filled only with the sound of the fire, and she realized her burden felt just a little lighter. "You're safe here now," he said quietly. "Rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." She looked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice, as though he had already made the choice to shoulder a part of her struggle. Her lips parted, but no words came. She simply lowered her eyes, clutching her child once more, and let the warmth of the fire and his promise wash over her. That night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. The cowboy remained awake, tending the fire, keeping watch as though guarding not just a mother and child but the fragile flame of hope they carried. Morning came with a clear sky, sunlight breaking through the remnants of the storm. She awoke to the smell of bread and coffee, and for a brief, surreal moment, It felt like the life she had longed for. The cowboy was already up, tending to the horse outside, his silhouette framed by the golden light of dawn. She stepped to the doorway, baby in her arms, watching him with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. When he turned and saw her, he smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "You've got a long road ahead," he said, "but you don't have to walk it alone anymore. If you'll allow it, I'll see you through." Her heart clenched at his words, and she felt tears rise once again, but these were different. They were tears of gratitude, of a soul that had been found when it thought it was lost forever. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Yes." That single word carried all the weight of her trust, her hope, and her silent plea for a future. The cowboy stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder, then glanced down at the baby who looked back at him with curious eyes. "Then let's start over, together." And so, under the soft warmth of a new day, the broken woman and her child began again, lifted from despair by the kindness of a stranger who had become their savior. The road ahead was still unknown, but it no longer terrified her, for she knew, no matter what storms might come, she would never face them alone again.